Okay. Hi, I'm Mauricio Gonzalez. I'm an internal medicine physician and emergency medicine resident.
Angie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Angie Sadeghi. I'm a gastroenterologist, president and CEO of Institute of Plant-Based Medicine in Newport Beach, California.
Avi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Avi Bitterman. I'm a plant-based doctor in New York.
Ostfeld.
I'm Rob Ostfeld, preventive cardiologist in New York City.
And practice surgical and medical weight management.
And Garth, smile. Give us a good smile to show. See, look, Garth, for everyone that follows Garth on Instagram.
Once in a while, I smile.
And then the Shurzais will be joining us, and also Stacy will be joining us in a little bit. Okay, well, let's start first with biggest misconceptions about veganism and vaccines. And let's start with the first one about who wants to take the question of, are there long-term effects of the COVID vaccine, and has this vaccine been developed too quickly?
I mean, you know, long-term effects, I think it's one thing people have to understand is that we've been doing vaccines for many, many years, and the science behind vaccines has shown extraordinarily low long-term effects, extraordinarily low. Now, do we know what the long-term effects are? Obviously, we don't. We haven't had the COVID-19 for a long time, but for enough time where we can look at long-term effects. But the actual mRNA design of the vaccine has been worked on for decades. We have had other vaccines work done for COVID-type coronaviruses before. And what people have to understand is that this virus is an mRNA virus. It does not go into your cells and into your DNA and recreate virus. It simply creates a protein that goes on the cell that's recognized. So it goes into your body and then it's out. That vaccine is not in you 24 hours later. It is just simply the machinery of your own cells producing the protein. And once those cells have been attacked and killed, there are no more viruses inside your body. We are looking at one single protein. That's the beauty of this mRNA, is that it is one protein. It's not a live attenuated virus that has multiple different antigens that we might react to. It's one protein. It's been looked at pretty carefully to see if there's any homologous components. And so I can't even fathom what the long-term complication may be, but I'm gonna really doubt that there is one.
In terms of the vaccine being rushed, I totally agree with Garth. I mean, this is mRNA technology that led to this, has been in development for decades. And the vaccine process specifically for COVID has gone through a rigorous study in multiple different phases, from early studies looking at dosing and safety and immunologic response to very large, as you know, phase 3 trials, with tens of thousands of people, one with around 30-something, one with around 40-something thousand people, with very good safety and excellent efficacy. Now, that's, and they're not super long-term. For vaccines in general, to my knowledge, the really only long-term complication that I'm aware of is really with the varicella vaccine, where it's a live attenuated virus, which is a very different thing. And sometimes decades later, people can get shingles. Now, we of course have to keep an open mind to, that there may be potential long-term side effects we don't know about. And as hundreds of thousands and millions of people get hopefully vaccinated, we may unfortunately find a very small percentage of complications that we don't know about. It's important to think about that, though, in the context of what we're trying to prevent, which is, of course, COVID. And through the lens of long-term, there are many long-term side effects of COVID, at least the time that we've had to follow it. Some studies showing that 30 to even higher % of people have long-term effects after being infected with COVID, some of them quite serious. So it's important to obviously think of the other flip side, the long-term effects of COVID, which hopefully the vaccine will mitigate.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, well, Rob and Garth are like completely right. I think that science and medicine, they always have to keep an open mind and an open eye to long-term effects. However, in people's mind, this long-term effect concept uh, is all about autoimmune diseases and cancer. Like most of the times, they tend to think that vaccines cause these long-term effects linked to type 1 diabetes, some different other autoimmune diseases and cancer. To my knowledge, and based on the data I've read, there's no such association, especially with modern vaccines. So I just wanted to make that clear. And of course, if you guys have any other like study to cite, I would love to hear it. But it is my understanding that current vaccines are not linked to any long-term effects such as autoimmune diseases or cancer.
That's correct. And along the lines of what Garth was saying, this vaccine, it's very, very targeted, and it's an mRNA particle that goes into our cell. And what it does, it doesn't make a virus. It just makes a small teeny weeny portion of the virus, the part that the spike protein that latches onto cells and takes it in and lets it get in there and do bad stuff. So we're just creating that spike protein, not the whole virus. So you're not going to get COVID from the vaccine, but what you're hopefully going to get is the ability to develop antibodies to protect you from that spike protein. So it's extremely focused, which will hopefully limit off-target effects down the line.
One would also consider that if you were to get an autoimmune reaction, which is not the case, but even if you were to get it from the vaccine, one could argue that you would get it from the real infection itself, from the COVID virus infection itself. So you have to always risk-benefit ratio it and put the risks and the benefits and go for it. And given the risks and the benefits, I think we would all agree that the long-term potential side effects are not enough to go against the vaccine, and we would still recommend it.
That's a perfect point, Angie, because like Guillain-Barré syndrome, which you could get with the flu vaccine, it turns out that you have a higher risk of Guillain-Barré if you just get the flu. I think the difference between us and the people that are so worried about vaccines is, first of all, we see the disease. They don't get to see people dying of COVID. So we get to see how bad it can be. They're living in an isolated world. And so I could understand if you haven't been infected, and if all the social media is feeding you is other conspiracy theorists, and you don't think that the COVID vaccine, the COVID disease is real, then you wonder, why would I put myself at a risk? But we know that there's a terrible risk from this virus, and the risk way outweighs the risk of the vaccine.
The safety profile of vaccines in order to get approved has to be quite high, higher than, say, for a medication, because when you give a vaccine, you're giving it to someone who's healthy. So you really, really have to have the benefit outweigh the risk, as opposed to a medication where someone has a problem already, so it alters the risk-benefit ratio. So the threshold to even get approved is quite high.
That's important. I just wanted to pop in and say, Dr. Tarr is here.
Hi, everyone.
So Dr.
Hey.
Hey, Sondema, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So tell everyone, introduce yourself and tell everyone about you.
Oh, so hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Tarr. I'm a podiatrist, foot and ankle doctor. Did my training in Cleveland. Actually graduated from residency this last June, and now I'm currently in Phoenix. I am plant-based, have been for the past 7 years, and my big focus is wound and amputation prevention.
I love you, Sondema.
Oh, thank you.
Sondema is one of my good friends. She's actually working with me and Angie to do a program for our nonprofit to reach the Black community and talk about plant-based nutrition. And that's why we're so excited to have you here today. You know, me and you talk about this at length, that we'll get into this. We have a whole section. Sondema is going to get into talking about reaching out to the Black community, especially the Black vegan community, about some of the distrust and concerns about the vaccines. And Sondema is brilliant and my favorite. So I just want to make sure, because she's not always vocal on social media, but I always will follow you anyway, because you're the
this is just the mRNA sequence, just the nucleotides itself. And if you read the package insert, you'll see some words that you don't know what they are. It's the lipid component that contains the virus to be transported in. There's no, like in some of the viruses, we've got albumin, which kind of feeds a attenuated virus, and we've got things that stimulate, like aluminum, that stimulate an immune response. We don't have that with this virus. So these things people are worried about, preservatives like formaldehyde, which is crazy because you get as much formaldehyde in apple as you do in a flu vaccine, but still, none of that is in this. It is fairly pure, unless any of you guys know anything different to me, but I looked at the package insert and it's basically the lipids and the mRNA, and that's it.
So it has, as Garth said, it has lipids, the mRNA, and potassium chloride. I think it has another kind of sugar, like sucrose.
Oh yes, it does. It
like
does. It does have a sugar.
And that's about it. No aluminum. There's no mercury, ethyl mercury. None of that. None of that. It's pretty simple and straightforward.
Yeah. Funny enough, I saw an anti-vaxxer getting all mad because there was sugar in it. Can you believe this? There's sugar in it. Oh my God.
I could break the keto diet now.
Well, that's what she said. She's like, I'm keto. Yeah, and
but
the sugar is.
You guys forgot the other ingredient, which is water.
Oh yeah, true.
Sure. So this vaccine is encased in a lipidome, and it has an mRNA in it. It has many particles with mRNA. It's injected into the muscle. The mRNA will be transcribed when it's in the muscle cell. That means that the mRNA, it's a messenger, and it will be transcribed into a protein. In this case, the protein is what we're looking to target from the virus. Some of the things you'll hear, and this is important, is that the mRNA can get into your DNA, and this is not true. Another thing you'll hear is that it can get into your DNA if you have certain other viruses that have reverse transcriptase. That's an enzyme that takes RNA and converts it into DNA. This is also not true. The reason it's not true is because reverse transcriptase doesn't just take any mRNA and put it into DNA. It requires a very specific primer. Coronaviruses have not evolved this complementary sequence. Other viruses that use reverse transcriptase have, and they hijack certain transfer RNAs to do that. There's no reason to believe, even if you could literally take reverse transcriptase and put it into every coronavirus and vaccine, and you still wouldn't expect it to get into the DNA. So it's not going to get into your DNA, it's going to degrade, and that's going to be it. But your immune system will recognize that specific spike protein that the coronavirus has. Once it recognizes that, the idea is it's going to be able to mount an immune response. That's the basic, short and sweet gist.
That's a great summary. And one thing I wanted to highlight, because that is really a concern that you brought up, Avi. People are worried about it getting into the DNA, which it is, to everyone's knowledge, not going to do. And as you mentioned, mRNA is not going to be transcribed back into DNA. But furthermore, the mRNA particle that's in the vaccine doesn't even go into the nucleus of the cell where the DNA lives. The mRNA goes into the cytosol, which is a whole different part of the cell, and doesn't go into the nucleus. So that's yet another layer of defense as to why it's not going to get transcribed into your DNA.
I would like to add that a lot of vegans, sorry, I'm stepping away from all the technicality, but I think that a lot of vegans distrust vaccines because it seems too sci-fi, right? They think this is extremely unnatural, like this is something weird and foreign. And I would like to add that it's actually not, it's actually genius. It takes advantage of our natural capacities. It just enhances our natural capacity. So I would like you guys to hear, your take on this. Like, how can we make our fellow vegans understand that vaccines are as natural as eating an apple?
I'm so glad you brought that up. A lot of my vegan friends have been saying, how could you promote this? This is not natural. And I would tell them that you have no idea what we have to do in the front lines. When you come into the ICU and you're sick with the infection itself, it's definitely, you're gonna get a ton of chemicals, a ton of medications. So if you really wanna stay natural, actually go with the vaccine. It's the most natural thing you could do to prevent the consequences of the disease, and really have to be bound to machines, the breathing machines and all that stuff. That's definitely not natural.
Mauricio, I think that's just an incredible analogy. I mean, when you're eating plant-based, you are in many ways optimizing your health, and then through natural processes. And it's a very similar theme with the vaccine, because what it does is it leverages our natural immune system to be able to better fight the virus. So I look at them as quite complementary and not mutually exclusive at all.
Well said.
So I'll take a little bit of a different approach. My approach to this is to, although there's room for each approach, my approach is to actually push back on the idea that being natural is necessarily the best thing for you in the first place. If you think about every other advancement in any other context, it involves doing things that are not natural. Having clean, purified water that doesn't contain pathogens, that is an unnatural thing. We all do it. Washing your fruits and vegetables with clean water is unnatural. Washing your hands with soap and water is unnatural. Having air conditioner is unnatural. Being able to heat your house is unnatural. All of these things are unnatural, and yet we accept them, and we recognize that they have an enormous amount of utility. Vaccine is no different, just like any other technology. If you want to truly be natural, you're not going to have a good time. You're going to really hate your life. You are going to not be able to use soap and water when you wash your hands. You're going to have to drink out of a dirty stream or something. You're going to bear the elements. You're not going to be able to wipe yourself after you're done with the bathroom. At least not with toilet paper. Yeah, you could use leaves. Have fun with that. There's some poison ivy. But yeah, I mean, so this idea that is just a complete misnomer. We shouldn't, being completely natural isn't the idea to strive towards. It's something actually we should not strive towards. It's a bad thing to be completely natural.
I love it.
I love it. And I agree. And I think that that's one main concept we can send to our community. Technology and science. You can phrase it any way you want. The way I phrase it is science and technology are natural. Because that's our goal, our drive to make things better. I totally agree. And we can actually have the same discussion with processed foods. For me, processed foods is one of the main things that we have in our favor to make the vegan lifestyle more affordable, more nutritious, and more enjoyable.
Dr. Stacy, vegan physician. Stacy, introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stacy De-Lin. I'm sorry I'm late to the call. I was in the OR. I think I still have some mask lines on my face. So thanks for putting up with it. I'm a physician. My specialty is gynecology and family planning. I've been a vegan for 10 years, and I'm excited to be here and part of the conversation. Really excited that we're here talking about evidence-based medicine, which is my area of focus and which I'm really happy to be able to talk about today. Go ahead.
I was just going to say on the natural side, because I think this is so interesting. I think we all have, but I've taken care of vegans with diverticulitis, appendicitis, cholecystitis, and obesity. I did a gastric bypass on a vegan. And so, this idea that it's natural is necessarily going to cause you to never get a disease is completely wrong. And with infectious disease, it's especially wrong because, as we've seen with COVID, possibly having a good immune system might create an even exaggerated what's called cytokine storm or inflammatory response. But this is where the vegans start to get like the carnivores, like this idea of like, oh, what was natural? What is natural? The way we evolved is what we should be eating now and doing now. We shouldn't be using medicines. But what they got to understand is evolution doesn't give a damn about you living a long, healthy life. All natural selection cares about is getting you to procreation, and that's it. So that whatever we were eating naturally as a caveman and doing naturally as a caveman has no really relevance in a society where we're trying to grow old enough to see our grandkids get married. And in order to get to these very, very healthy long-term lives, there are times where you're going to have to fight disease. It's a natural process, actually. Disease is a natural process. And I look at these solutions that we have, like the vaccine, is really human ingenuity and a beautiful part of the life process.
Healthier diet can make you more healthful, but it's not going to make you bulletproof. And there's a place for medications, there's a place for vaccines to fill those extremely important and unavoidable voids sometimes. And I think along the lines of how Avi was looking at the theme of natural, I think is really important. And it's sort of like, it gets at how do we look at life? Like we come to accept things. Like now, you accept that maybe, like you say, you have air conditioning and you have heat. And whereas long ago they did not. And I think it also, that dovetails into one of the themes that I've heard about why people are resistant to the vaccine, which is like, I don't want someone to tell me what to do, which is a very natural individualistic reaction. But then if you look at it kind of through the lens that Avi was talking about, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but like, what are some things that we accept? Like you stop at a stop sign, you wear a seatbelt. These are things that we accept as governmental regulations to live in the society that we live. Like you can imagine if people just disregarded those things, there could be quite a lot of chaos. And so we come to accept certain external demands on us, if you will. And I'm not saying that anyone's demanding or forcing the vaccine, but I would try to look at it through that lens. It's not necessarily like someone's trying to tell you what to do. They're trying to offer something that could be helpful for you. And if you think about, well, I've accepted not driving straight through a stop sign, maybe if I think about the vaccine in that way, I won't feel as forced to do something as I might have before.
We can be skeptical about what's out there and industries that push things, but ultimately I think it's about trusting in the scientific process about what's safe, what actually is safe, and knowing that there are these multiple medical organizations, oversight organizations that are really dedicated to making sure that this is rolled out in a safe way, versus things that are touted in the wellness industry, which are often guided by profit. And I think through this, like looking at this vaccine process, I personally have learned a lot about, where these ideas come from, the vaccine skepticism. It's really just been over the last year that I found out how much of a huge industry that the sort of wellness industry is. And just like people's concerns about big pharma, that, there's often a huge profit motive behind companies that are telling you not to take medical advice and not to take a vaccine, but instead to try their product, whatever it is. And I think that we need to apply that lens to the wellness industry as well. And really, see if our best interest is in mind for organizations that are, groups that are recommending that you buy a certain product, and be able to also.
Stacy, well said. Thank you for bringing that up. And furthermore, even though the supplement industry does give those people who sell the supplement kickbacks, unlike that industry, doctors cannot get kickbacks from any pharmaceutical companies. This is to be delineated in great. I mean, I have to tell you, it's illegal to get kickbacks from the pharmaceutical industry. When we promote vaccines, it's because of public health. It's not because we're getting any kickbacks. And I just wanted to make sure people understand that, because somehow people think that we're in cahoots with the pharmaceutical industry.
Perfect. So perfect, Angie. That was incredibly well said. So who's going to address the main issue with a lot of people, especially vegans, who think that this vaccine was rushed?
Well, I don't know that I'm an expert in that area, but I believe it was not rushed. And I know that, Garth was touching on this earlier, and the technology behind the mRNA vaccine has been in development for many, many years. So it's not something that was brand new. And the vaccine has gone through rigorous clinical trials, early stages, which evaluated different doses and levels of immunity, which then informed later larger randomized controlled trials, the two big ones, one with about 30,000 people, one with around 40,000 people. And although those studies may have seemed to be done quickly, one of the reasons that they were able to be completed quickly is that COVID is so common. Like, so you need to have enough cases of COVID in the community in order to be able to see a difference between one arm and the other. And if there was like one case every 2 years, it would take forever to do it. But there are a lot of cases of COVID, so you can get the amount of endpoints you need in the study more quickly than you would for a less common disease. So that's why they're able to complete it seemingly quickly, but not really, because it was with the same kind of scientific rigor. And the 70,000 or so people that were in these studies, to my knowledge, that's more than has been in other studies of other vaccines. So I think that it's really a testament to both the brilliance of the scientists, where the technology was kind of sitting and waiting, and to the horribleness of COVID, because it gets around so much, that led to us to be able to have these very, very promising findings seemingly quickly.
And I'm somebody who's participated in a ton of clinical research, and often the pieces of it that are really slow and annoying and that can take months upon years is like how to enroll patients, how to bring them in, to get them to sign consent forms, and these pieces that when you suddenly had a scientific community universally dedicated to one mission, there were so many of these steps that were often cumbersome and in no way had anything to do with safety that were lifted. And other pieces like, reagents for vaccines being made far before we knew if a vaccine would work, which meant it might have to be thrown out, but it was something that everyone was financially and, committed to, governments were really pushing. Those were the pieces that, for any of us who are involved in clinical research, take time, take way more effort than is often needed. And I think it's miraculous what the scientific community did to come together to make this happen quicker. But the one piece that wasn't compromised is the safety piece.
I think that, as Stacy was talking about earlier, how rigorous the study is and the safety so far seems with these vaccines. One of the pushbacks that I've seen happen is there's the power of the anecdote, and which is really in stark contrast to evidence. And all of us here believe very much in evidence-based medicine. And you may have heard an anecdote about someone who may have had an adverse reaction temporally related to when they had a vaccine, and whether that's true and unrelated it's not clear. But those anecdotes can be viscerally powerful. For example, like if there's a war going on and tens of thousands of people are dying, it's a horrible thing, but oftentimes people don't wrap their heads around it until they see the picture of that one 7-year-old orphan crying, and that really brings it home. And that's really the power of the anecdote. And when it comes to vaccines, that's not evidence. That's, what's evidence is the tens of thousands of people who have been in a rigorously adjudicated clinical trial. So I would be very careful to not, it happens to all of us. I think it's human nature, just to not let yourself get sucked into the power of the anecdote, and really have faith in the power of science.
Yeah, that's
I think, go ahead, Stacy.
I was just going to say one thing that came up for me that I kept getting messages about was Bell's palsy, which is a troubling health condition in which there's part of the face can get paralyzed. And often we don't know why it occurs, but it does just happen sometimes in the general population. And something that was widely shared on social media was these volunteers for the trial got Bell's palsy. And just like you said, Robert, like these images came up that people were shocked and scared. But if you looked at the actual numbers, the numbers in the vaccine trial were even less than in the general population for that has Bell's palsy. So, correlation is not causation. And just, as you mentioned, the power of the anecdote, and really, thinking about, rather than looking at one example, asking, medical professionals and people who know, what does that actually mean?
I think we've all seen Bell's palsy because it's such a common disease. We've all seen it. I'm sure Mauricio sees it all the time at the ER. It is so common. 1 in 10,000 individuals have Bell's palsy, and it's a very treatable disease. We give them steroids, people get better, but it's so common that, it doesn't seem to be any more common in the vaccine group than the general population.
And as everyone's been mentioning here, it's always incredibly important to keep in mind the quote side effects of getting the virus, which you know, it can kill you, it can make you very sick. Some people are asymptomatic, and there really are, unfortunately, serious long-term complications for people of getting COVID. So it's always important to keep it in that framework.
I think one thing that we should touch on, because I see it a lot in social media, is this, I don't know, fear that the vaccine comes from pharma, and pharma is inherently evil. And this is for profit, and they're here to make money. And I think one thing that really comes up a lot is this idea that they can't be sued. And so I kind of want to touch on that a bit, because, you know, we have a vaccine compensation program in America, and I don't think people understand where that came from and why that came there. So they think, well, they produced a vaccine, they can't get sued, therefore they can do whatever they want. What they got to understand is, first of all, they've got Pfizer, Moderna, they got a lot riding on this. If this does not work, if people started getting really sick, that would be a humongous hit. You can still sue them. It's false that you can't sue them. You can, especially in a class action type way, but they would lose money in their stocks like crazy if that was the case. But the idea behind the vaccination compensation program was in the 1980s. DPT was being given, and there was a hint that possibly DPT could cause encephalitis. And so there was some lawsuits about that. And these lawsuits, experts came to the lawsuits and said, there is no way that this was caused by the vaccine. If you look at the numbers of people that get encephalitis that are vaccinated versus those that aren't, it's exactly the same. This person got a vaccine, they happen to get encephalitis. It wasn't related. And yet they were losing the cases, and the pharma was losing millions of dollars. Now, meanwhile, you got to understand, these drug companies make a lot more money out of the drugs they sell than they do out of vaccines. And so they were like, well, forget it. We're just not going to do vaccines anymore. And that's became a public health problem. There was no more R&D for vaccines. And so the government set up a program that would allow a certain amount of dollars or a percentage of every dollar spent on vaccines would be taken and put into this fund to allow payment for vaccine complications. Like we've said before, there are risks. There will be people that have some complication. The complications are less than the risk of getting COVID, like Dr. Ostfeld said, but those risks do exist. But the idea was, instead of having the drug company have to go through these very painful lawsuits, a board would be established and they would go through it themselves. And that board meets every year, and they do give out money. I think something like $4 billion have been given out since the beginning. It is not an admission of guilt or an admission that there was something wrong with the vaccines at all. In fact, the people that sit on this board vaccinate themselves and their children, even after seeing whatever bad stories they get. But they wanted a system that would be easy for the patient to get retribution if there was a problem, and at the same time, not deter research and development. And so that's why that exists. It's not some kind of, weird cabal, globalization, weird conspiracy where we're hiding the effects of vaccines. Rather, it's a way to make it that if you do have a complication, you can get remuneration, but it's not in any way an admission of fault.
I gotta make a confession. Before the pandemic, my knowledge on vaccines was limited, to say the least. I gotta be completely honest. This has sparked an obsession about reading about vaccines, immunology. Obviously, I'm not an expert, but one of the main comments I have on my Instagram post is like, this vaccine was talking about the mRNA vaccine, was definitely rushed. Why? Because we've been dealing with HIV for 3 decades and we don't have an HIV vaccine, which at the beginning I was like, well, there's certain logic on that. So after I did my basic research, apparently there was a vaccine in 2009 that came out and was 31% effective. The thing is that the FDA asked for at least 50% effectiveness before approving it. So this vaccine was definitely a big hit, 31% in Thailand. And right now we're working on a vaccine called the Mosaico vaccine, and the results of this trial will be published in 2023. The thing is, HIV is an extremely difficult virus. There's no natural immunity. If you get the virus, that's it, you get it. There's no turning back. So that makes very difficult to study antibodies, T-cell response, and so forth. So I just wanted to touch that because that's a common question that I get pretty much at least once per week. How come we don't have an HIV vaccine?
What happens, people just don't understand this. There were 2 aborted fetuses in the 60s, and the cells from those aborted fetuses are used to actually grow the virus when they're using live attenuated viruses. They then harvest the virus out of the cell and put it in the body and then regrow cells. You can make the cells replicate. But no fetal cells are ever injected. They're not aborting more fetuses as we go. We have these cell lines in culture that we can grow, so they're not out there getting at abortion clinics getting specimens, and none of these fetal cells get into your body. And really, vegans should be happy about this because they used to inject animals with the viruses in order to grow virus, and now we don't need to do that. We do it with human cells that are in culture.
But we don't actually, there are actually no human fetal cells that are used for.
Not for the mRNA at all.
For the mRNA.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the point, the salient point here, as you mentioned, Garth, there's no demand, even if they were, which they're not, but even if they were, there's no additional demand that's being generated for additional abortions, even if you were to do this. The cells are the cells, and their line, the cell line is the cell line. You're not going to continue any sort of harvesting. I'll just quick mention another reason why the vaccine is not rushed and why, even though we have it so quickly. So to add on to Rob's point, when he mentioned that the prevalence of COVID is so large that we were able to get the amount of cases we needed so quickly. Another aspect for why we were able to get the vaccine so quickly was the sequence of trials that we were allowed to do. What usually preclinical studies have to be done before phase 1 study. So before you test on humans, you need to test on animals. Now, they didn't skip it. They did it. They did test on animals, and we'll get into that. But they allowed them to, the FDA allowed the companies to test on the animals in parallel at the same time as the phase 1 studies were being done on humans. So they were actually testing the vaccine on humans before the animal data even came in. So that cuts back on your whole time. You can imagine if you have to wait before you even start the human trials up until you finish with the animal trials, you're going to take longer. That step was put in parallel in such a way that it would cut back on a lot of time.
I think Stacy made a good point. I think all of us as vegans, especially, there is a certain amount of research and looking up that you have to do. You kind of have to navigate this world as prior to, you being vegan or plant-based, you're told certain things about nutrition. You're told certain things just about, I think, health in general, that sometimes, you find out aren't 100% what they appear to be. I think Black vegans, in addition to kind of navigating that space, also have to deal with the healthcare system as a whole, and just the systemic racism that comes along with that. So, and I think, I don't want to speak for all Black people, but I think a fair amount, especially in America, have had, whether there are just 100% purely just very negative experiences, whether it's with doctors, with nurses, within the healthcare system as a whole, have had close family members be subject to that same treatment, or there's just this inherent fear. Even with me today as a physician, I would still be afraid walking into a doctor's office that didn't know me, walking into an ER, that the people didn't know me there, didn't know who I was, because as we've seen, especially it's been so vocal this year, not that it should, but your degrees, your accolades when you're a person of color in this country won't save you. Most recently, Dr. Susan Moore at University of Indiana Medical Center died from COVID. And the attending that was taking care of her, overlooked her symptoms for several days, tried to discharge her early. She had to advocate for her own chest CT, had to call CMO of the hospital, everything. She was eventually transferred out to another healthcare system, which she said she was taken care of there. And she passed away, I want to say December 4th, correct me if I'm mistaken, but she definitely passed away this month. So there's a lot of distrust, rightfully so, within the Black vegan community. And I just would, I guess, like to say, I think it's important to find a doctor that's board certified, a doctor that has a just extensive amount of verifiable knowledge. Ideally, probably not one that is solely has a social media presence, but one that you've established a good rapport with, to feel comfortable enough to ask these questions, to feel like you have a safe place to talk to about your concerns. But at the same time, I know Danielle, you follow her as well, Dr. Betty, she's Ethiopian anesthesiologist in California. She's absolutely brilliant. You know, a lot of things that I've heard from especially my family members, because I've had to try to coax them to get the vaccine when it's their turn. You know, a lot of my family members are healthcare workers, are nurses. Most of the women in my family are nurses, and some of them have been apprehensive about getting it, even though they're up for vaccination phase 1. I can understand the hesitancy in a certain degree, again, going back to the distrust within the medical system as a whole, but there's no time to wait. There's just none. You know, this disease has killed, over 300,000 people just in the United States alone. Black Americans especially are at a higher risk of dying from COVID. And then you add on, especially healthcare workers or just people in general that are working during this whole pandemic this entire time. So I think it's a multifactorial issue for sure. I think there's no easy way to kind of unpack all of these issues that are going on in the Black community, the Black vegan community in general. But I think that would be my first thing, is to find a doctor that has been well vetted, find a doctor that is board certified, and talk to them. I think it's helpful to write down questions and bring them to that doctor. And I know personally a lot of the doctors, really all of the doctors that I follow, because I don't follow any physicians that aren't pro-vaccine, they'll tell you the truth. They'll tell you the honest to goodness truth. They don't want to see you in the ICU. They don't want to see you, potentially die from this disease or just have prolonged morbidity from this disease in general. So, thankfully, the women in my family that were kind of hesitant about this vaccine, that are healthcare workers, after me talking to them and after some of my other family members, they've decided to get it. So that makes me happy, and that just kind of settles my heart in general. But
can you? I hear a lot from the Black community, especially the vegan Black community. They keep hearkening back to the Tuskegee incident. Yeah, that's become a really big issue. And I try to explain that had nothing to do with vaccines. It had to do with withholding. But I don't know if you could speak to that for the community that may be listening, because that seems to be a big issue.
In general, exactly. So the Tuskegee experiments happened usually in the mid, 1950s. And at that time, they were focusing on really Black men or men of color in general. For me, obviously, it was a horrible, horrible isn't even the word, disgusting thing that happened, not only with the Tuskegee experiments, but with Dr. Sims, quote unquote, the father of gynecology, experimenting, and I use that word very loosely, obviously, on enslaved Africans. And that's why we have, unfortunately, all these ideas about Black people don't feel pain as much, Black people don't need as much anesthesia or pain treatment or things like that, because of treatment that was going on back to, slavery times, 1800s. So for me, the Tuskegee experiments, even though horrible, are completely different. And I think what's going on now in the world where COVID is existing and what happened during the Tuskegee experiments are completely different. I mean, you just turn on your news, senators are getting vaccinated, Dr. Fauci got vaccinated, you have doctors across all races, across the world that have access to it are getting it. This isn't something that is just focused on the Black community. COVID, I mean, obviously it affects the Black community in the United States, just with the morbidity and mortality at an increased rate, for sure, but it's not something that is exclusive to us. The vaccine isn't something that's just being pushed on us. It's a worldwide issue. So I feel like the Tuskegee experiments and the other experimentation that Black people unfortunately have been subject to in the United States, even though abhorrent, I think you can't compare the two. It's apples and oranges for me. So that's, again, what I kind of had to tell my family members that, okay, I understand your hesitancy in that regard, and I understand your apprehension, but it's completely two completely different situations for me.
One point that might be helpful here is that the technology behind this vaccine was developed, at least in part, by a young, brilliant African-American woman.
Yes.
What you're saying is something I've really had to unpack in my area of specialty, which is like reproductive medicine and gynecology. Like you mentioned, the horrifying history of Dr. Sim, and you know, I'm very able to say like, oh, have you thought about an IUD? And to patients of color, like that, there's a brutal history of forced sterilization in this country and communities of color. And so I've had to learn to reckon with that in my own area of expertise. And when it comes to talking about vaccine safety, I've been really trying to apply that. And I think that all of us in this group have talked collectively about how we're not trying to convince hardcore anti-vaxxers, but there is a group of people with a lot of the issues that we've named today, very valid skepticism, and particularly in communities of color, that history of, you know, a top down, the doctor says you should take it, you know, go ahead and take it. I think we really, really have to honor that really, really troubling history. And I think that's why we're here talking about it and talking about, you know, where to find information that you can trust, while also being really respectful of, you know, there is reason for skepticism. Yeah.
Exactly. I agree 100%, because I know you and I have talked about this before. It's a huge issue and it's very disturbing. I know when I first became vegan, there was just a huge amount, and I was kind of shocked, especially in the Black vegan segment, just a lot of just misinformation, and again, just a lot of disinformation or misinformation in general. I think, again, it's important to go back to, and I know it's hard because also sometimes people feel more comfortable with someone that kind of shares those experiences in life, that share just different, I guess, like ethnic similarities, but this is America. They say what, only 2% of physicians are Black. So you have to go outside of the community to get information. That's just the reality of the situation. So again, I think it goes back to, and again, I know it's hard, but finding a physician that you trust, finding a physician that is well-versed in the data, not relying on family members or Facebook articles that people send you that are not, you know, doctors that are treating COVID patients on a daily basis, because I also think it's important to kind of make that delineation as well, because I know there are healthcare providers that are selling detox plans and things like that and saying, oh, don't take the vaccine, or they're just very, you know, gray area about it. But I think it's important to kind of ask yourself, when you're looking to these people as a source of information, how many COVID patients are they seeing? Are they actually, you know, on the medical floor? Are they actually in the ICU dealing with these patients? Or the long-lasting effects of COVID, are they managing these patients? And if they are, then they're a good source of information. If they aren't, and they're telling you not to take this vaccination and buy my detox plan instead, or buy my supplement line, then I think it should raise a red flag in your mind and say, you know, why is this person trying to sell me these things? Why are they trying to kind of, again, just have me go down a different route? So I think, again, communication is important. And then also, again, I can understand people's apprehension about communication as well. Sometimes, and I will admit, also being a doctor, it can be intimidating when you go to a doctor of a different specialty. You're kind of outside of your own realm. So imagine a person that isn't in healthcare trying to sit down with someone that just naturally, by the nature of the patient-physician dynamic, has more knowledge than you. Sometimes you won't feel comfortable, but I think at the same time, it's important. Like, you have to be able to feel comfortable with your provider, whoever they are. And this is something that is unprecedented for definitely our time and our generation. So again, I think it's just keeping the lines of communication open, and then hopefully those people have a physician that they trust or someone that they trust that is well-versed in the data and can help lead them in the right direction.
Amazing. That's so well said.
Yeah, I think Dr. Tarr made a phenomenal point. I mean, what you did, Dr. Tarr, was you were calm, you talked to your family, you know, you heard them, you understood where they're coming from, and you were basically able to convey the message that vaccines are safe. That requires time, comprehension, knowing where people are coming from. I gotta be honest with you guys, I've been guilty of this multiple times. Like, when people raise questions in social media about vaccines, not all of them are anti-vaxxers, not all of them. Some of them are just hesitant. And as per recent statistics, 20 to 30% of people who are labeled as anti-vaxxers in the United States are actually hesitant. So we can actually convert those folks. So I think we should all like try to somehow, it's difficult because sometimes your mind tries to see these patients asking questions about vaccines as anti-vaxxers, but in reality, they're not. They just require time. They need a little bit of explanation. And I mean, we know all about phase 1 and 2 and 3 trials, but they don't. And it's scary. And I think my point is that we should make an effort, a concerted effort, to try to convey this message in simpler terms.
On that theme of meeting people where they are with a trusted information source is so important, because it seems like now more than ever, misinformation is really tearing at the fabric of our society, whether it be in the medical space, the political space, the science space. We see it amplified in ways now that was never possible before, now with social media, where misinformation can be so prevalent and pervasive and really have such harm. So I think those themes of meeting people where they are with trusted information is incredibly important. And sometimes it's really hard to know where to find it.
Concept of like pandemic privilege, those of us who are, many people are able to stay home, to stay in their homes by themselves, and thinking about how our actions impact others, and that it's ultimately the conversation is not just this doesn't affect me, or the concept like I probably don't need a vaccine. It's incorrect to think that because you're young and healthy and you're a vegan that this won't either kill you or give you long-term health effects. But often that idea of like, I think I'll be okay, so I'm going to live my life, I'm going to go on vacation, I'm going to do the things that I want to do, I'll skip the vaccine, really doesn't, I think that so many people probably watching this are vegans because of that sense of compassion. And just like asking fellow vegans to tap into that compassion to those who we feel like are, don't have the same ability to distance themselves and, are powerless in the situation for a number of reasons. I think, thinking about that is how we move forward as a country and how we help protect everyone, get past this.
I actually was really hoping, Avi, I was hoping you could touch on, so I think one of the biggest questions that Angie's received about how do we reconcile the testing on animals for the vaccine with being vegan? And I know you have a lot of great calculations with regards to, what we do in our everyday life. And I was hoping you could go through that.
Yeah, so Something you may hear from patients who are ethically inclined is, you may hear several things in response to pushing back to the coronavirus vaccine. And before we get into this testing, we'll start from the things that are just so easy, just completely false, easy to respond to. So the first thing you may hear is squalene. Squalene, there's an article published that the coronavirus vaccine may have squalene in it. Some of the companies that are still in phase 1-2 testing do have squalene in it. Neither the Pfizer nor the Moderna vaccine does have any squalene in it. The concern there is that it's harvested from sharks in the majority of cases. So while it is true that several companies that are developing a vaccine are using it, it's the overwhelming minority of companies, and the companies that look like they're developing a vaccine that will make it to market do not have this product in it. So no sharks are being harmed for the coronavirus vaccine that you will be getting, almost certainly. The other thing you may hear is the most general question: does it contain any animal products? According to the NHS, the COVID-19 vaccine, there it's referring to the Pfizer vaccine. It does not contain any animal products. The same thing is true for Moderna. According to the Vaccines and Regulated Biological Product Advisory Committee, which was on December 17th, 2020, it was the meeting presentation for the emergency use authorization. The application for the mRNA 1273, which is the Moderna vaccine, quote, the manufacturing process is cell-free and contains no human or animal products, preservatives or adjuvants. Now, you may hear, okay, well, if that's true, then how does it have cholesterol? So you'll notice that if you look at the ingredient list, whether it's the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, one of the ingredients you'll see is cholesterol. Well, I thought that that's only from animal products. How is that there? So actually, the supplier, when I track this down, the suppliers actually do have plant-based cholesterol. And how did they get that? They have the sterols in the plants and they synthetically modify them into cholesterol. So one of the suppliers of antipolar lipids, their product, you can look this up, vantilipids.com/product/700100. They actually sell a plant-based cholesterol. So yeah, you can take the sterols from plants and you can make a vegan cholesterol, and that's in the vaccine. So even the cholesterol is vegan. All right, so there's no animal products in the vaccine, just to make that absolutely clear to every one of your ethically inclined patients. This does not have animal products, and even the classically recognized animal products are not animal products for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. The next thing you'll hear, and this is where we're going to get into most of the meat of the talk, is for animal testing. So, okay, it doesn't have any animal products. I'm not creating any additional demand, but okay, but what about the animal testing? I reject all sorts of products in my life that are tested on animals. Why is this any different? There's a number of reasons why it's different. So before we get into why it's different, let's get into what happened. So yes, there was animal testing like any other pharmaceutical product that's required for FDA approval. How many animals were tested on? It depends which vaccine you're talking about. For the Pfizer vaccine, their organization was 6 mice per group, and they had 4 groups, which were a total of 32 mice. They also tested on rhesus macaques, those are monkeys. They had 6 per group, 3 groups total, 21, and additional 3 for non-immunized matched monkeys for additional testing, gives you 21 rhesus macaques total. Pfizer tested 2 vaccines. One was called BNT162b1. The other one is called BNT162b2. If you add them all up together, you can get 64 mice, 42 rhesus macaques, a total animal count of 106 animals that were tested on. Okay. The Moderna preclinical data isn't as descriptive in terms of how many animals were tested on, but they used a very similar protocol. we can infer that the numbers weren't that far off. Why is this not analogous to rejection of other products? There are several reasons. Number one, you're not creating more demand. So it's not like when you look at cosmetic products. If you purchase a cosmetic product that's been the company tests on animals, they have a tendency to say, okay, you're going to have our sales, and then we're going to have another product that we're going to put in the line once the sales peter out. We're going to have the next best hit, and then we're going to test on more animals. You can understand how you purchase this product. You are funding additional testing. This is not how it works in preclinical testing for approved pharmaceuticals. The testing is already done. You taking the vaccine is not going to incentivize anyone else to test this vaccine on further animals. In fact, if anything, it may do the opposite. If anything, what will happen is in the analytics, the companies will see that there's an additional piece of the pie of population that are unvaccinated. And then there'll be in the analysis, they'll be, okay, well, maybe we should go and take this vaccine that we have our product and test it on more animals because there's an additional piece of the pie that's an unvaccinated population. So if anything, in contrast to the cosmetic industry that tests on animals, not only will you not create demand for more animal testing by taking the vaccine, if anything, if there was any argument, you may actually create demand by not taking the vaccine for more animal testing. That's point one. Point two is, even if you were in the case, even if you somehow were hypothetically in the situation where it was a decision of testing on animals or not having a vaccine, that's not the situation you're in. That's a fairy tale. The situation we're in is it's already done. But even if that were the case, it would be hard to imagine not doing this. And here's why. I'm not going to defend animal testing. I think it is unfortunate what happened to those animals. In many cases, if not all cases, the animals are euthanized when this does happen. After the fact, they're harvested for their tissue, for histology and whatnot. However, if you contrast that to the number of people saved, and the expected number of people saved, it's astronomical. So Pfizer's estimated capacity by the end of 2021 is 1.3 billion doses. That's actually higher now because we have fortunate news that each vial of the vaccine contains an additional dose. We thought it would be 5 doses. Now it's 6 doses. So there's a 20% increase in what the estimated supply would be. But even without that, the estimated capacity that Pfizer has is about 650 million, enough to vaccinate 650 million people. So it's 1.3 billion doses. Moderna has a capacity in 2021 of about 1 billion doses. Both are two doses, so that's enough to vaccinate an additional, with Moderna, additional 500 million people. Now, if you look, I'll share my screen. So if you look at let me know if this is coming through.
Yep, it's coming.
Is it working?
Yep.
Yeah,
it's working. Cool. All right. So this is the efficacy data for the Pfizer vaccine. And you'll see this is a cumulative incidence of those who had received the placebo versus those who had received BNT162b2. BNT162b2 is the vaccine that Pfizer is going to be going with. That's the vaccine that you will be getting, not BNT162b1. This difference over here is going to be the absolute risk reduction. It's the absolute risk reduction, but keep in mind it's the absolute risk reduction for 112 days, how long this ran for. You can extrapolate this to get a number needed to vaccinate. So just like number needed to treat is 1 divided by the absolute risk reduction, 1 divided by the absolute incidence, the absolute incidence here would be the absolute risk reduction is going to be the number needed to vaccinate. It estimates around 52.6 people. That means if you vaccinate 650 million people, you get over 12 million people who would have otherwise gotten the disease in the next 112 days to not get it. Now, in reality, this is even greater because we have additional supply, but we'll get to that shortly. Now, if you prevent this many infections, how many deaths will you prevent? Well, you look at the infection fatality ratio. Infection fatality ratios are variable across countries. They're variable across continents as well. The average, if you average it all out, it comes around to be about 0.6%. That means if you get, on average, if you take all the old people, the young people, people with pre-existing conditions, people without pre-existing conditions, across the globe, you will get around a 0.6% infection fatality ratio, which will come out in 112 days. That comes out to about 74,144 lives saved. Now, this is an underestimation. Why is this an underestimation? It's an underestimation because we're not vaccinating this way. We're not randomly vaccinating. We're prioritizing people who are high risk first. We're prioritizing healthcare workers. We're prioritizing elderly patients. So this number is assuming that we're randomly vaccinating. If we assume a linear relationship and we extrapolate it out to 1 year, because this is only what we would expect in 112 days, it would translate into over 200,000 lives saved in 1 year. And 5 years and 10 years ago is far, far greater as opposed to if we did nothing. Now, this doesn't even consider, this is just on a per life basis. So even if you want to take issue with the 106 animals that were tested on, you would have to square that away, even just on a per life basis. We would expect in 1 year that you would be saving around 2,279, over 2,000 lives per life tested on. Any utilitarian would sign off on this. Many threshold deontologists would sign off on this, even if this was the case. But it's not just the case that all vegans just care about a life is a life is a life. Many vegans also recognize that what they care about is sentience, and not every life has equal sentience. Is there a way we could equalize this sentience differential? Now, even without doing that, I'll just point out that the case is already incredibly strong, just in this utilitarian calculus. If you are testing one to save 2,000 lives in 1 year, and potentially in 10 years over 20,000 lives, these numbers are underestimations by everything we know. But even that, many would sign off on it. However, if you think about it, the quality of the life that's going to be lived, the type of life that's going to be lived, the degree of experience is not the same for humans as it is for these other animals. So there's no perfect way to equalize that because we can't live in the minds of any of these other creatures. However, there are rough correlates that we can use. They're not going to be perfect because they're correlates. That's what correlates are. However, what you can do is you can have several different sentience correlates to equalize, try and at least approximate the equalization of sentience in terms of how much sentience equivalence life was tested on versus sentience equivalence life was saved. One way of doing this is cortical neuron count. Other ways of doing that is cortical synapse count. It's not perfect because not all parts of the cortex correlate with that type of experience. But to spare you the calculations, although they are on the screen, what it comes out to after all is said and done is that these 106 animals that were tested on, summated together, would have the equivalent of just above 3 humans worth of cortical neurons. Putting that all back into the picture, in 1 year, if we equalize it in terms of per being tested on to the sentience equivalent of human saved, you test on one, and in 1 year, you will expect 77,000 saved. Now, these calculations are underestimations for several reasons. Number one, there's an increase in supply of the Pfizer vaccine that we didn't know of before, about 20%. There's an extra dose in each vial. Number two, we're not going to be vaccinating randomly. We are prioritizing people who have a higher infection fatality ratio. So that's also going to be an even greater amount of lives saved. But just to put this in perspective to you, if people have different views in the classical trolley problem, where if you could pull the lever, if you save one person versus the 5, some people will say no. But if you scale it up enough and you say, okay, well, how many individuals would you sign off on testing if it would save a given amount? This stadium, just take a look at this massive stadium just filled with people, just to put like something just over 70,000 in perspective for you. Like this entire stadium is 72,000 people. It would look crazy to not test on one individual to save that many people. It would just look insane, let alone if the individual was already tested on and it was already all said and done. If you're not even going to make that decision. If someone asks you, okay, well, it's per individual already tested on, you can save a stadium of people. It's nuts to not do that. If you're a vegan for a utilitarian reason, it's crazy not to do that. If you're a vegan for a threshold deontic reason, it's crazy not to do that. In almost any sensible normative theory that would lead one to veganism, it would be insane not to engage in taking this vaccine. That's all I have for now.
Amazing.
That's
all you have? That's
impressive.
Wow.
Super impressive breakdown. One thing I would highlight too is that many of these people, whether they be vegan or not, they have pets and or care for animals on their day-to-day lives. And if they get sick and hospitalized or die, what's going to happen to those animals? So there are uncountable numbers of pets and other animals that people care for that may be put at significant risk if their caregivers fall ill.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
There are quite a few things that vegans sign off on that cause more harm objectively to animals. If you are a vegan that is okay with organic plant products, for example, the fertilizer for which uses not just like manure, which does go to animal agriculture, particularly dairy farming. They also use blood meal, they use bone broth, they even use the minced up chicks, the male chicks that get minced.
What? Seriously?
Seriously?
They do? Oh my God, we need to publicize that. That's terrible.
Garth, you have to hear Avi's discussion. You contribute so much more to animal suffering and death by eating organic versus conventional. It's fascinating. So that's why it's so interesting to me when I wanted Avi to discuss this, is because it's so interesting to me where, we can have such a profound public health impact by getting this vaccine. And then you think of something that plenty of vegans watching this do every day, like eating organic produce, that actually, Avi, if you don't mind just briefly going into that, how much supports animal agriculture.
Sure. It actually, so there's a rough calculation that with organic corn that I've done. And it actually causes, if you just modify your diet from conventional corn to organic corn, 2,000 calories a day, that difference comes out to be more in terms of the pockets of animal agriculture than purchasing a cup of milk a day. If you are okay with, or not okay with purchasing a cup of milk a day, I don't know why you would be okay with that type of difference in terms of your food choices, unless there's some overriding factor that's otherwise needs to be considered. But more importantly, if you're okay with that level of purchase and that contribution to animal agriculture, I have no idea where the concern is coming from for the COVID vaccine. It's something that isn't even being demanded, something that isn't even contributing to more animal agriculture. It's just astounding to me how someone will be concerned about some non-demand from the COVID vaccine, but then eat the organic kale, spinach, and corn and whatever product at Whole Foods. It's just bizarre.
Not to mention that a lot of people don't trust in conventional produce, like in fruits and vegetables, because they're filled with toxins, right? So you can actually pose an argument that from the nutrition point of view, it's even more damaging, because you are actually reducing the consumption of fruits and vegetables from people who fear toxins from conventional produce. That was fascinating. Guys, unfortunately, I gotta run. I have another thing I have to attend to. It was beautiful to see you all. We have to do this more often with wine and food, but not being recorded.
Mauricio, before you go, tell everyone where they can follow you on social media.
Sure. You can follow me on at dr.Mauricio Gonzalez on Instagram.
Bye.
See you guys.
See you, Mauricio.
Avi, I just wanted you to kind of elaborate a bit on the organic thing, because I do think that a lot of ethical vegans have this concern. What I try to put out there is there's no such thing as a perfect vegan. We live in an imperfect world. Everything we do in some way is our cell phones are technically not vegan, etc. But I think the organic one, when you taught me that and we went through the data together, was most impactful to me to realize that literally almost everything we do contributes to animal harm, but especially organic over conventional. We've discussed this at length. You and I, data doesn't show any health benefit, but it is interesting that people would select eating organic produce over, like we just discussed, like a vaccine. And maybe if people understood the levels of harm even from organic produce, then they would understand that the vaccine in the scheme of things is really, not.
Sure, I'll share my I'll share my screen for that. So actually, this comes from a meta-analysis of over 50 different farms, and if we look at the percentage of nitrogen inputs that come from animal sources, whether it be animal byproducts or manure, the main contributor is manure. Across the board, different, whether you're looking at grains, vegetables, starchy roots, legumes, across these different plant products, organic will beat out in terms of the percentage of nitrogen from animal inputs. It will then conventional across all categories. So for example, grains, you have 52% of the nitrogen coming from manure compared to 2%. In terms of vegetables, 23-5, starchy roots, 76-31. Even legumes actually, interestingly enough, didn't have, in this analysis, didn't have any animal inputs for conventional, but did have animal inputs for organic. Byproducts, animal byproducts, so these are the things like blood meal, bone broth, even the minced up chicks.
So I don't think people know
organic.
I don't think people know that the minced up baby chicks go into the manure for organic.
Yep.
Where did you get this information, Avi?
Sources.
Where'd you get that chart from?
Oh, this is So this is a meta-analysis. Let me see. The paper is called "The Nitrogen Footprint of Organic Food in the United States."
Oh, wow.
So it's this. This is the graph. This is the chart is based off this. The graph that breaks it down and color coded. But I'll share it. I'll actually share it with the group.
That'd be great.
Yeah, in the chat, I think we have a chat. Okay.
I think that this is such a great example too. Like, I just learned about this via Danielle, and thank you, by the way, for dramatically reducing my grocery bill now that I'm no longer shopping organic. I just had this sort of idea about like, oh, organic is safer, pesticides are bad. And it was an idea that I hadn't really challenged. And, that's another way in which I'm really patient with people who are questioning vaccines or questioning, because we have these ideas that we sort of tie on. Sometimes it takes a little time to absorb the new data and learn about it and be able to change our thinking. And, recognizing that we're all subject to certain biases about our ideas about things. It just, takes a little time and a little information to change our habits and our ideas.
Yeah, it's really the ultimate scam. It will take someone who wants to do the right thing. They want to do better for the environment. They want to do better for the animals. They want to do better for their health. And it will charge them more money to do none of those things. There's no evidence that it's better for your health. When you actually look at the outcomes, the results are null. There's no evidence it's better on aggregate for the environment. When you look at the outcomes across different environmental impacts, the results are all over the place. There's definitely no evidence it's better for the animals. When you look at the animal inputs, this contributes not only, they charge you more money and a greater amount of the percentage of money will go to animal agriculture. Now, if you are okay with that, if that's something that is okay to you, I have no idea, just no idea why one would ever be concerned about animal testing that's not going to be funded by you taking the vaccine. Don't get it.
Right, like with the testing, the vaccine's already done, done. Whereas
Yep.
organic produce, you're buying every week. And
Yeah, you're continuing to this perpetual contribution for future harm, which is not
Yeah.
going to happen with the vaccine.
Yeah, I don't think people go. Were you a philosophy major, Avi?
I was not. I just love philosophy.
You talk philosophy. I was a philosophy major. You talk like my philosophy classes. I don't think the general person, I think, so I don't know if you know about Immanuel Kant versus John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism versus intention.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think a lot of vegans, it's more a Kantian type thing. Like if their intention is to prevent harm, they're not thinking on a utilitarian method. They're thinking is my specific intent at this moment is to not cause harm. It may in fact cause harm, but my intent is what is important. I think that's what they all look at. Yeah. But
sure,
I mean,
a lot
it's
of
an
people
interesting
do.
argument.
well, I think it's just interesting.
Yeah, a lot of people.
That there's, that there's no way, in any way, shape, or form, for any of us to be a perfect vegan that has no contribution, even conventional produce, or no, contribution to animal harm in any way possible. And it's just fascinating to see. I actually feel like, this is just my own, Garth, you'll probably have a good survey of pool too, but of my own people that have like hardcore trolled me, it usually is actually people that have like organic or toxin free in their profile.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt.
After me about the vaccine. And what's funny about that is the fact that it contributes to animal agriculture anyway. So it's just, and like Avi said, it's not the vaccine is not a living contribution, it's said and done. Whereas the produce you buy every day, every week, whatever, is just a continuous thing. So I think that people should just kind of, have the perspective of that we're all trying to do the best, especially because this video and everything we're doing is targeted towards vegans. We're all trying to do our best to reduce harm in many ways. And there's zero way to be a perfect vegan.
Yeah. No, there isn't. I mean, I know they're starting to try to this veganics movement now, which is like with veganics, it's no animal products. It's all composted from plants. But even then, like they do, it's amazing the slippery slope you take, because then they're like, okay, we got to prevent like snails getting on there, so I'm going to use diatomaceous earth. But they don't understand that diatomaceous earth actually slices the snail and kills it. I mean, that's the point being, you're never going to get 100%. So I think that they then just go to, look, my intention is to do no harm, and I'm doing the best I can. But you can't ignore Avi's data right there. I mean, you can't ignore a stadium full of people. It's just too strong an argument.
Right. I mean, the key is, like, even if you take the view where it's an intention-based view, unless you're going to take that to say, like, oh, well, my intention is to do no harm, so I'm going to sign off on letting a stadium of people die, and that's okay, because it's all about the intentions and not about the outcomes. That would look crazy to any person.
Well, you know what intention
and also,
is
once you,
I mean, intention
also,
rests
once
on
you
them
know
not knowing anything, right?
Yes, exactly. And once you know the data, precisely,
Yeah,
once you know that, oh, actually, this is how reality is. Presumably, if you do have the intentions to do the right thing, then if the data coincides with that being the right thing, then you'll modify your action accordingly.
Right.
So now that you know the data, now that you know that this is really what we're up against, now that you know that these are how many people we can save, presumably you'd align your actions in accord with that. Same thing for organic. If you presumably, now that you know the data, and if you take issue with that, then if you don't take issue with organic, you really shouldn't take issue with the vaccine.
Someone wanted to also touch on the whole, we're all pharma shills. And I know that, Angie, you had briefly talked about how it's not legal for us to be, in bed with, pharma, and there's the Sunshine Act, but I was just hoping you could just go into this a little more for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, so just to go back and talk about this, you're seeing a lot of people who are in the natural and the holistic realm who are actually selling detox programs and supplements, and they're getting kickbacks when they sell supplements, coming out and saying you can't trust doctors because they're making money off of pharmaceuticals. It's ironic because You see these people are actually getting kickbacks from the supplement industry, yet it's absolutely illegal. And we can all speak, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, we cannot take a dime from any pharmaceutical companies. Some schools actually disallow any pharmaceutical reps to enter their residency or training program. I know when I was a resident, pharmaceutical industries were not allowed to come into the building, and we were not supposed to be swayed. The only thing that could drive our decision making was the data itself. And when we had PowerPoint presentations on the risks and benefits of medications or pathophysiology of anything, and we mentioned any medications at all, we could not use brand names. We had to use the actual generic name of the drug. So if any doctor, usually doctors, if there is any interest in any financial interest, we would have to disclose that. So if I'm, for example, getting money from Pfizer, and I do a talk, I would have to say this talk was funded by Pfizer. It's illegal to get kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies as a physician when you're treating patients in the clinic. And I know this is very simplistic, but it's true. It's illegal, and if any doctor does that, they can risk their license being taken away and be sued. So I mean, if anybody else has any more comments, please. Yeah. So
you gotta check it out.
This beautiful presentation of why we shouldn't, we should, as vegans, receive this vaccine. And thank you, Avi, because I was actually literally waiting for this. It was important to me. But you know, at a very much more of a simplistic way, I thought about it. I was like, okay, let's just say, because I didn't have any exposure to any of these numbers you were presenting, but I was thinking, all right, if my mom had community acquired pneumonia and she was going to die of a overwhelming lung infection, or if I had pyelonephritis, which I've had a few times, and I was going to go to the hospital and they said, well, we need to give you antibiotics, would I say no because they're not vegan, because they have been in the past tested on animals? The answer is no. I would still save my life and proceed with the antibiotic therapy. So it's the same thing. So if you claim that you're not going to get this vaccine because you're a vegan, then you better not ever get any antibiotics or any medications or any surgeries. Let's say you have acute appendicitis, you go to Dr. Garth's hospital, and Dr. Davis says, if you don't take out your appendix, you're going to die. You can't. Are you going to say, no, I'm vegan because initially these things were tested on animals? I mean, you can't do that. We can, there's no such thing as a perfect vegan. It's a spectrum, and we try to do our best every single day. You know, for me, I try to eliminate some of the obvious stuff. Obviously, I don't eat any animal products. I try not to eat, to buy animal skin, and I try not to, purchase animal products in my cosmetics. But at the end of the day, we can only do our best. And this is a public health problem right now. Thousands and thousands of people are going to lose their lives. They're estimating that by this spring in April, about 500,000 people will die. So this is not a joke. We really have to take a stance as physicians and as vegans and show that we're more evidence-based. It's the most important time right now to be evidence-based and practice science rather than promote being quacks out there, you know.
So well said. Yeah. And literally, well, you can even just Google, are smartphones vegan? The answer is no. Smartphones, tech products like smartphones are actually not vegan. Then you have to get rid of your smartphone.
Now that's a no-no.
What if you light sage and crystals around it?
You know, I think another argument too is just like, I'm sure if someone's watching this, it's because they believe that they're an advocate for animals. And so if you're dead or not healthy enough to be able to do that job, you can't advocate for the animals. So something to remember too.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, so yeah, just imagine if we ended up disproportionately not killing ourselves off for the coronavirus as vegans, and while we let the meat eaters survive. Like, what's that going to do for the animals? Just why? We're small enough of a population as it is already. Now we need to do that more. Amazing. I think the biggest key here, just to hammer the point home, this does not create demand. When you get an appendectomy or a surgery, No one's testing appendectomies on mice anymore. There's no point. We have all the data on humans. Pharmaceuticals that are already approved for the indication. There's no reason for the pharmaceutical company to pay for animal testing for the same exact indication for the same exact drug. It's fruitless. This doesn't create any demand. There's no harm that you're doing. You're only preventing harm.
That's a huge point.
Yeah, I mean, my experience was, the anecdote I always give is just that I live close to a hospital, and each day when I walked my dog, I walked past a large refrigerated truck full of bodies that couldn't be handled. And I walk to work every day in that scenario. And because in New York, we're so densely packed, there's no escaping it. And I know that in a lot of the country, people are spread out and maybe it hasn't hit their family yet, but I know that space is not a thing that will save you. And I think, we had the New York surge, and then there was the Sun Belt surge, and there was a theory that that we would see these pockets here and there crop up, and that theory was wrong. It is absolutely everywhere now. California, where you live, Danielle, looks like New York. This is, I've heard public health experts use the phrase, it's coming for all of us. And we've seen a Thanksgiving surge. It's going to be compounded by a Christmas surge. Having lived through it, it's something that'll stay with me through my entire life. And I only hope that if you're in some area in the country, or you have a family that's been spared, that continues to be your experience. But, I think that I'm asking people to listen to the stories of healthcare workers who are on the front lines is really important, and sharing those stories.
So I think devastation is the perfect word. I mean, as a cardiologist, we sometimes take care of pretty acute situations that are quite life-threatening, totally unrelated to COVID. But I've never seen more people die in such a short period of time from COVID than I ever have from heart disease. And it's not just people dying, it's people being incredibly sick and surviving, but with serious sequelae. And it wasn't just older people, and it wasn't just people with pre-existing conditions, it was younger people too. People in their 20s and 30s, who may not statistically be so much at risk, but were having issues. So I think devastation is exactly the right word. I've seen people slowly dying who are not able to be around their family members. And literally, if they can say goodbye, saying goodbye through an iPad, it's just devastating. So anything that we can do to help minimize it, I think, is incumbent upon us.
I think it's so important. I always say that, I worked, Temple's ICU during residency. I mean, we did the most lung transplants in Pennsylvania. And I think of my 3 years in the ICU every winter. And then I think of my 3 years of cardiology fellowship. And I think I've never seen a flu do this. I've never seen a flu do this. And every time someone compared it to the flu, I know we can go through the numbers and show that it's not like the flu till, the day is old, but just seeing it firsthand, just like Stacy said, I'll never forget it. And I don't think we'll ever see something like this again, I pray. But there was never a winter or a flu. I never saw people my age intubated in the ICU when I was in residency, or even the beginning of fellowship before COVID. I never saw healthy people. It's an entirely frightening disease. And I feel the same way. I wish I could have expressed it more and better. And I tried on social media to get people to take it seriously, but it's, for those of us who've seen it, we have no reason to lie to you. And it's the scariest thing ever.
It's so scary. And, as the medical community, as we've been witnessing such horrifying experiences, the one wish we've had is the vaccine, to be able to prevent these this type of these problems. I mean, I get calls all the time to go in and put PEG tubes, feeding tubes in people who are like in a vegetative state, and so it's very sad. So yes, they're not dead, but what kind of quality of life is that? I just did a PEG tube for someone 2 days ago with she was brain dead because of the COVID respiratory failure. So we've been dreaming about this vaccine, and I want everyone to know how grateful we should be for this, and how grateful we should be that our scientific community put together and developed this vaccine, and how brilliant this technology is, and we should not take it for granted.
Thank you for saying that.
Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone, so much for participating. I want you guys to go around and say where everyone can find you on social media. So, you can find me, I'm Danielle Belardo. You can find me on Instagram at Danielle Belardo MD. Go for it, Stacy.
I'm Stacy De-Lin _MD.
Angie.
Angie.Sadeghi on Instagram.
Garth.
Oh, Dr. Garth Davis on all the different social medias. Make sure it's Dr. Garth Davis with a blue check and not Dr. Graf Davis or Dr. one letter displaced Davis.
Rob.
I'm at Dr. Ostfeld, Dr. Ostfeld.
And Avi.
YouTube.com/AviMD, and for Twitter it's at Avi Bit, AVIBITT MD.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you all.